So I'm going to do my very best to run this in an appropriate fashion today. So welcome, everyone, to our Nashville MTA Board Meeting for the month. I will call the meeting to order, and we will begin with a roll call. Let's see, Jessica Dolphin.
Present.
Mary Griffin.
Present.
Walter Searcy. Janet Miller, present, and Gail is absent. So you all feel so far away from me over there. So great. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I hope everybody had a chance to take a look at the minutes from the March 23rd board meeting. Are there any suggested changes or edits?
Move the adoption of the minutes.
Okay, great. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Burp.
Opposed? Minutes for the March 23rd meeting pass. So we're moving to our public comment period, and we have two individuals who have asked to speak. If there's any others, please let Monica know, and we will recognize you. And I want to remind our public commenters that it is a 3-minute limit on comments. So with that, we will start out with Mr. Knight. Where is Mr. Knight? I saw you walking across the street a minute ago. How are you? Good to see you.
Okay, I'm good.
Great.
Good afternoon, everybody. My public comments today are going to be on a sour note because last board meeting I was able to say something really nice. Unfortunately. So the last board meeting I was here, I talked to staff as I usually do. I am a transit advocate. I am a board member of TNN as well. Y'all had an issue with your new flyer 14 buses that came in. And I reached out to staff to alert them to issues that I thought did not even make sense. It kind of let me know that New Flyer did not do quality control. Some of the things that I saw with the buses and actually being on them. I kind of had some issues. So I've been quite quiet since February. There are only a few members of staff who know what's actually been going on. I've been having trouble with Quick Ticket. And my card was compromised in February. And it went from being compromised to me actually having to go out of my way to get a prepaid card to put onto my account just to kind of find a different way around it so that my main banking account was not affected. Once that happened, I started to notice issues with my account, which I brought to customer comments. I called and got on Zeta Riggs' nerves. I got on Keith's nerves. I got on Tim's nerves. I contacted Brian multiple times. It got to a point where I was having to reach out and send emails to Steve, Andy, Mr. Oliphant, multiple different members of the staff that honestly didn't have anything to do with that situation. But as it was progressing and getting worse for me, I felt like if I'm having this issue, how many other customers were? To fast forward that, twice this month, this agency has had problems with Quick Ticket. The bus operators are frustrated. The customers are frustrated. Just a few days ago, it wasn't working for them to actually load money. A problem I have had pretty much this entire month. And I've had to go to the staff. I'm gonna say to you all, if you truly want the customers to believe that y'all care, it's best that you respond. Do not tell someone to reach out to you and you're not gonna respond. You should never have your secretary send an email and say that this person isn't available or this person isn't available only 2 weeks after the fact that they've left a voicemail. That's trifling. That's disrespectful. And it honestly, excuse my words, pissed me off. I contacted the council. I contacted the FTA to let them know. And I also want you all to be aware, on social media, one of your customers on the Route 55 was on a New Flyer older bus and was getting rained on, and he posted the video on social media. Customers were reaching out to me asking me, did I see it? So y'all might want to figure that out because it's trifling of you all to do that. And I'm just going to say going forward, if you're going to tell somebody to contact you, stand by your word, all of you. Good day.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Next, we have Ms. Ann M. Pope. And I believe, good. Thank you for being here, Ms. Pope, and I will remind you that we have a 3-minute limit on public comments. Thank you. Yeah, we got you. Mhm. For your comments, Mrs. Pope. So those were the 2 comments that we have had. Are there any other public comments? Seeing none, this will close the public comment period. Thank you both for your comments. So I'm sure the board has had a chance to review the board package and taken note of the information-only items. And to remind everyone, those items include our monthly financial report compared to budget. And Ed is very gracious. If there's anything unusual, we automatically will pull that onto the agenda. The monthly operating statistics and the upcoming procurement projects list. Are there any of those items that you all would like to pull to the main agenda? Or you're fine with information only? Everybody good? Everybody good? Okay. On the consent agenda items, we actually don't have any consent agenda items for this month, so we will note that for the file and move on. And Mr. Searcy, I'm afraid you've got a kind of sad little report today too. So what do you got for us, Mr. Searcy?
What the agenda says, absolutely nothing.
Okay. Walter gets a bye for the month. So we did not
right.
have any items for discussion or action on the Operations and Finance Committee report. Under the New Initiatives and Community Engagement Committee, We have two reports, and one is a pretty lengthy report that I know we're all anxious to see about Access Ride and evaluations and the improvement study. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dan Freudberg, who is our Deputy COO for Operations, to lead us through that. Hello, Mr. Dan.
Hey, good afternoon. Great to see y'all. And I'm also going to be joined by Mr. Ken Hosen from KFH Group, who's been working with us hand in hand on this project for a little over a year now. So we're going to be providing a brief project status update, and then we'll also have a discussion of some potential policy changes that are out for consideration today. Again, not recommendations at this point, just things that are on the table for us to look at and get feedback from. So as a quick background, in May of 2021, the board awarded a contract to KFH Group for this project, which includes a complete review of the Access and Access on Demand programs, as well as benchmarking, process review, and analysis of technology. And in addition, studies examining how fixed route, first, last mile services, and infrastructure improvements can work with more traditional paratransit services to better meet the needs of customers with disabilities. And we do have a few slides here. So let's see. There we go. So up on the screen at the moment, we have 6 primary focus areas for the project. And there were goals associated to each of these areas. So some examples of those goals include improving on-time performance, enhancing the customer experience through mobile app and web-based self-service tools, as well as access to real-time customer information, improving service productivity, and encouraging fixed route use. So now, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Ken, and he's going to give us a general project status update, and as well as an outline of what the upcoming activities are for the project over the next couple of months. So, Ken?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Ken Hosen with KFH Group, and going to get right into it. As you may remember, we've been conducting this study a little over a year, and we did a first aid benchmark assessment where we reviewed the services, compared them to a number of other cities, and no alarm bells went off, which is always a good thing. Some issues here and there, some inside baseball kinds of things. We then did a variety of outreach with focus groups, public meetings, surveys, and meetings with individual stakeholders. After that, we put together the full assessment and a set of possible operating strategies and improvements. We did an assessment of the fixed route accessibility. We looked at WeGo Central, a number of issues there. We heard quite a bit from the customers on that one. And now we're trying to put it all together into one set of strategies and options for the board, for the management to select, and the customers to select to move forward. So what I'm going to talk about briefly here is the remaining project schedule. Right now, basically, we're down to vetting the strategies and the options. Then it's going to go to selection. That's what y'all are going to do. Select the options and the strategies that, to move forward. And then me and my great partners in this project are going to write it all up, vet it one more time, make sure we got it right, and then we will be finished with the project. You'll have a series of recommendations and a full implementation plan. So that's where we are with the schedule. And the next one is just to brief you very quickly on the upcoming public engagement. This is round 2. We're going to have 2 focus group meetings where we select a number of interesting stakeholders, often riders as well, and we hold 2 focus groups. We usually, truth be told, we get some of our best information from the focus groups. We're going to interview stakeholders. We have 5 up there. If there's more, we'll interview more. That's not a problem. We're going to have 2 public meetings, May 16th and May 18th, at the Downtown Library and the East Park Community Center. And then we've already met once with APAC. We're going to meet again with them, give them the full presentation, have the full discussion, and get to hear their last comments on the recommendations. So that's where we are right now with the outreach and the status of the project. And I guess at this point, it's going back to Dan.
Yeah, we're going to do a little musical chairs here in the presentation, and that's not the last time you'll see Ken either. But I did want to take us through a few items that we've gone ahead and moved forward with, and these are not necessarily policy level changes or things that could be potentially controversial or significantly affect customers in a direct way, but they were items that kind of rose to the top during conversations of things that we could do in relatively short order. So I won't go through all of these in detail, but I did want to call out a couple of them. So the first item up regarding moving access supervisors within scheduling, I just wanted to bring that up because that's kind of the first in a series of potential organizational structure changes that may come out of this project. And we've had a lot of meetings internally about what that might look like. But we do have a challenge right now with certain core functions of paratransit operations, such as reservations, scheduling, and dispatch, being in multiple different areas, different departments. So we're looking at options where those can be better coordinated under a more centralized management team. I also wanted to mention on subscriptions, which are standing orders for recurring trips that passengers take on the same day and time each week. We recently, up until recently, we had a limit of no more than 50% of all of our trips scheduled could be these subscription type trips. The idea being you have plenty of capacity for the on-demand type trips that you get, a few days or a day in advance. However, we don't currently have significant capacity constraints on the core ADA paratransit program. And with that, we were able to remove that 50% limit. We're not actually quite there right now anyways, but we wanted to give us flexibility in the future. And this is also a benefit for customers because it allows them to have, if they have regularly recurring trips, they don't have to worry about calling in every single time to schedule those rides. Then I did want to touch on eligibility as well. So during the pandemic, we postponed in-person eligibility meetings and evaluations where new potential customers come to see if the service is right for them and if they qualify based on their abilities to use or navigate the fixed route network. And there's a couple of advantages to going back to in-person screenings. One of which is that it provides an opportunity for customers who are looking at paratransit as an option to also learn more about the fixed route service and ways that it might be able to accommodate their needs, at least for some trips. And again, that's not going to be true for everyone, but for some, it can be helpful. But it's also helpful for customers if they have questions, whether about the access program or fixed route services. So these short-term actions are relatively straightforward, and we've been able to move forward with these relatively quickly. But now we're going to get into some of the more complex issues that we have to kind of work with, things where there's not necessarily a clear path forward. There are pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages to all of these strategies that we're going to talk about now. And first, I'm going to focus on potential changes to the core access branded ADA paratransit program. And then Ken's going to talk a bit more about changes to the access on demand or customer choice program that we have. So the first item I have up here, and I'm going to go through each of these just because they're pretty important in terms of potential impact to customers, is called a provider option program. So this is a program that would give us as the agency the flexibility to take a trip that a customer originally scheduled as an access trip and essentially convert it to an access on demand trip and book that trip on behalf of the customer with an access on demand provider. Now, the customer would then receive the trip as potentially a direct ride under the access on demand program, but they would still just pay the regular paratransit fare because that's what they booked, that's the program they booked the trip under. Some advantages include allowing us to reschedule difficult to schedule trips, take them out of the dedicated in-house runs that we have. which allows us to be more efficient with our schedules and also can improve reliability as well and free up capacity on board our vehicles, as well as the vehicles of some of our third-party providers. Now, the program would be completely voluntary. Customers using this program would agree to participate when electing to opt into the Access on Demand program. But even the customers who opt into the program would still have the option, if they so choose, of opting out on a trip-by-trip basis for having this potential of being having the trip moved to the Access on Demand program. So I know that program, probably of all these on the list, is probably the most complex and has the most things to kind of work through. I'll go through the rest, and then we'll pause for a little bit, at least on the core ADA paratransit piece, for any discussion or questions before we move on to the Access on Demand piece. Next up, we have no-shows. So we have an existing policy. It was looked at as part of this project. It's good policy. It's in line with FTA guidance and all of that. However, we don't currently enforce it. And by not enforcing this policy, we do have fairly high late cancellation and no-show rates. There's other reasons for that, but certainly not enforcing the policy is a contributor. And this can lead to, frustration by customers when they're on board a vehicle. The vehicle goes to pick somebody else up, and they just have to sit there for at least 5 minutes. That's our policy, sometimes longer, waiting for the customer to appear, only to never actually pick anybody up. It's frustrating for customers, frustrating for, for our drivers and dispatchers as well. And they're also fairly costly because you're sending out a vehicle to perform a trip that doesn't actually end up taking place. So we could immediately begin enforcing the policy, but that could potentially lead to a number of customers first receiving warning letters and then potentially service suspensions. The current policy is progressive in nature, but with the number of individuals that could be affected, I thought it might be better to take a little bit of a softer approach. So we've already started kind of reaching out to customers as we can to let them know that that we've seen they have a high number of no-shows. But one effective tactic that other agencies have also seen that's helped before you ever get to the level of service suspensions is to require customers that have a lot of no-shows to actually call in and confirm their trips on the day that the trip's going to take place. And that way, you're sure that they're going to actually take it. And if they don't call in, then the trip is removed from the schedule or canceled. Next up on the list, we have a fare policy. This one's pretty straightforward, but currently paratransit eligible customers receive half off of fixed route fares, but there's no such discount on WeGo Link. Further reducing or waiving fares on both services could potentially encourage fixed route utilization, but there's also a risk of increase in eligibility applications for access. So it's definitely an area where you just have to, weigh the advantages and the risks of a strategy change. Regarding onboard time limits, currently our policy is that all trips on paratransit must be scheduled to take fewer than 90 minutes. Now, some may occasionally take more because of traffic or other conditions, but we schedule them all to take fewer than 90 minutes, regardless of the distance. For
Each
a one-way
way.
trip, exactly. Current federal guidelines and best practices, though, generally tie the maximum time that a customer can be on board on paratransit to whatever the comparable travel time would be on a fixed route trip with the same origin and destination, usually plus maybe 10 or 20 minutes to account for wait time. So though we don't do this in practice, under a current policy with a 90-minute fixed cap, a passenger could theoretically be scheduled to be on board for more than an hour for a trip that would only take a few minutes on fixed route, and we'd still be adhering to the policy. Now, again, we don't do this in practice, but it's just an area where there might be worth looking at. Many agencies have adopted policies that tie onboard times directly to fixed route travel times, and that improves service equivalency between fixed route and paratransit. But this also means, at least for our case, that some paratransit trips could take longer than 90 minutes. So just as an example, a fixed bus route trip from the Bellevue Park and Ride on the Route 3B to our Myatt offices off the 76 takes well over 2 hours. Even under normal traffic conditions, the schedule it's going to take more than 2 hours. You have 2 transfers, and that's, during weekdays when services are running very frequently. So it is something to consider if we adopt that kind of a policy, how long is too long? Then we'd also need something in place to handle trips that don't necessarily have a comparable fixed route travel time. So, if someone's coming from Jolton or some area where we don't have fixed route service. Now, the FTA doesn't have any guidelines for that. They don't consider those to be ADA required paratransit trips. But internally as a policy, we obviously need to have something in place, something so that people are not on board for an unreasonable amount of time. Moving on, we have trip negotiation. And with trip negotiation, rather than immediately booking a customer's trip at the exact time requested when the customer calls in, which is what we do currently. You say you want a 9:15 pickup, we say, okay, we'll be there between 9:15 and 9:45 or 9 to 9:30. With trip negotiation, the reservationist, while they're on the call with the customer, actually looks at the schedule and offers up options to the customer that would fit with existing runs and trips that have already been scheduled. So rather than 9:15, they could say, well, I can't get you at 9:15, but I can get you at 9:05 or 8:55, and work with the customer to see what option among what they have available works for them. Now, there are limits to that. You wouldn't give the customer an option that would make them late to a scheduled appointment time, for example. And there is the possibility, or the likelihood that some customers will not receive the exact trip time that they requested with trip negotiation in place, but it does allow more efficient schedules to be built and also more reliable schedules. So as a customer, you might want to know, rather than saying, hey, get me at 9 o'clock, and we say, okay, and then get there at 9:30, while we're on the call with the customer, say, well, I can't get you at 9, but I can get you at 9:30, and they know what to expect. Last up on this list, we have procuring new software. This one's also a little bit more straightforward, but it's definitely would be a large undertaking for the agency. The current software we have was implemented in the mid-2000s, and it's been upgraded. It's not just like the 2004 version that we originally put in place, but there are many newer technologies and solutions available now on the market that are starting to be adopted for paratransit operations and that have pretty compelling features, especially features that improve the customer experience through self-service, such as real-time information and smartphone apps. So, we've gone over a lot in a relatively short amount of time here, so I did want to pause for a second if there's any questions on these particular items, and then we'll have time for discussion as well after Ken goes through the potential changes on the Access on Demand program.
Questions? Keep
Okay.
going.
All right.
It's a lot.
All right, Ken.
I'd also highlight the information that Dan and Ken are going through is the same type of information presentation they'll do in the public engagement, so we'll get feedback from user groups and other stakeholders before we start formulating recommendations.
And then the board will prioritize or come up with which recommendations.
Yeah, anything that would result in a policy level change to the program would come back in the form of a recommendation for adoption by the
Okay.
board ultimately.
Okay, great. Okay.
Great, okay.
Keep going.
I'm back. We're going to talk about, briefly about access on demand. Just overall, the purpose of the access on demand was to act as a relief valve for paratransit, gives the riders another choice. Sometimes it's a better choice, and it gives the riders options. The other thing about the access on demand, we have to remember it is a choice program. If riders don't want to ride on it, if they have a problem, they can always ride on access. So what we're looking at here is through the outreach, we heard from quite a number of people that said that they can't get a ride in real time. They call up, they can't get a ride like they're supposed to. And so we asked the vendors, and they said 60% of the riders are scheduling the trip in advance. So it's no longer an on-demand service, and during peak hours, you can't get a vehicle unless you've pre-scheduled it ahead of time, and that's not the purpose of the program. The problem there is there's just not a lot of providers that are willing and able and getting over the hump the drug and alcohol testing is always a big problem because most taxi companies and Uber and Lyft do not do drug and alcohol testing. So if you go ride on an Uber or a Lyft, I don't, but if you do, the drivers are not drug and alcohol tested. What's that? I guess I don't anymore. Well, that, and the same thing with taxi drivers, typically, not always, but typically. What FTA is now permitting is if the rider is given a choice and the rider makes the contact with the provider that's part of the on-demand program, then that provider does not have to meet the drug and alcohol testing. They don't have to go door to door. This is FDA approved, and quite a number of systems around the country are doing this. We see it as an option for riders. They could still call one of the other providers, I think one of the Mobility Solutions. They could still call them. They are drug and alcohol tested. So they could still ride on demand if that was the provider of their choice. So the riders continue to have options, even if Uber and Lyft are introduced. They don't have to ride on Uber and Lyft. It's their choice. So that's the approach that we're looking at. If you want to get more vendors, more drivers in there to really do access on demand, it's going to have to use Uber and Lyft and all the local, or more of the local taxi companies. So with that in mind, the other part of this is the door-to-door service. It's very difficult to get Ubers and Lyfts to go to the door. So that could be a problem. So it wouldn't be door-to-door, but again, it's choice. So if you feel you need door-to-door service, you can always ride on Access, or if one of the providers says we'll go door-to-door, you can select that provider. Revising the current fare and subsidy structure. Right now, it's a very generous, compared to some of the other systems around the country, it's very generous in the subsidy level. It's rather high, and it kind of encourages really long trips because there's no extra cost associated with them. So one approach that's used by a lot of systems is to reduce the subsidy. So you pay a certain amount when you get in, and then there's a subsidy, $14, $30, $40. That's very generous. So we're discussing possibly reducing that subsidy. So the trip may cost more for some, and might cost less for others as well. So we're looking at that subsidy program and seeing, is that worth it? Would any riders be significantly impacted? And again, if it's a long trip and it's going to cost them a lot more money, they can always take Access. So that's one approach that's being looked at, and that would certainly reduce costs quite a bit. Right now, there's a daily cap. I believe it's 2 trips a day. We're thinking, why not leave it as a monthly cap? That way, you can bank. If you're not going on a trip for a couple of days, you can bank those trips. The customers have a lot more flexibility there, and we think that's a winner. And then eliminating the trip grouping requirement, which is kind of a joke anyway, typically, not here necessarily, but where these programs operate, because they're almost always one-on-one. And they say, yeah, but we'll pick someone else up if there's someone available, but they're almost always one-on-one. And that changes the reporting requirements with FTA, and it might change the formula a little bit. We're going to see what that would do, but we don't think it's very much at all. And that would bring in, again, the Ubers and the Lyfts, because they won't do trip grouping. So with that in mind, that's a lot for Access on Demand. I guess we'll open it up for questions specific to that or in general.
Questions?
You point out one of the critical problems is that you don't have enough vendors available. I know at least 3 or 4 vendors who've been trying to get on the service who haven't been able to get engaged. So how do we breach that?
So one of the things that we didn't talk about here today, but that we're looking at is we're in the process of developing a request for proposals that we would put out for new providers. Our contracts are up with our existing providers for Access and Access on Demand this fall anyways. And what we're looking at, especially for the Access on Demand program, is to create more of an open solicitation process where essentially you post what the requirements are for participating in the program as a provider. But then rather than doing this big procurement every 5 years, you either have kind of open enrollment periods or just leave it open the whole time for prospective vendors to enter into the space and say, hey, here's what I have, this is what I can do. And we think that'll help a lot with those kinds of situations. Right now, if someone calls us up and says, hey, I can provide this service, without having some type of competitive solicitation out there, it's difficult for us to bring them on quickly.
So the next enrollment period begins when?
So our current contracts are up at the end of September. We'll get an RFP out before then for sure. And then we'll make sure that's published everywhere. And we'll also reach out to any vendors that have contacted us over the last couple of years with interest directly to make sure that they're aware. So we don't have the exact date, but it'll be sometime in the next couple of months that we'll probably open up that solicitation process.
I think the other issue that's kind of buried in what Ken and Dan have been talking about, Walter, that also raises to the policy level issue is a lot of the feedback we get, particularly from smaller vendors, is the insurance requirements are onerous, the liability expectations are onerous, the federal regulatory issues that Ken talked about are onerous. So again, that rises to the policy level thing of, well, if we want to open it up, have more providers, provide more opportunity for small disadvantaged business on that side, give riders more options and potentially a higher quality of service, then frankly, we're probably gonna have to bite the bullet on some of the other things. And I'm saying that with, I think we're 50-50 today. When Gail's here, we have a majority of attorneys at the table, but I think today Janet, Jessica, and I are an even match for y'all.
Yay. So I would say what is most interesting to me is what the customer is saying, right? I mean, we're not doing this just for fun. So I think the results of the focus, because it's hard as a board member to gauge which ones to select, not understanding what's a priority to the customer. So I think coming back with that would give us a great context. And then the other thing is, I get operational efficiency and all that, but I think this board also cares about improving the customer experience, right? Because our access ride has been one of the growth, the demand for it is growing because we're all getting older, right? And more infirm. So I would like next time that we look at this to talk a little bit about what are the riders saying, what's their prioritization, and then what's really going to improve the experience. I also think if you're going to have policies, why have a policy if it's not enforced, right? So I think those are all conversations that would be worth having. So anything to add, Mary, Jessica?
Yeah, thanks. I want to just tag on that a little bit because I had that same thought when you, I'm sorry, I forget your name. Ken, when you were talking about the focus groups, you mentioned some of them will be riders, and I was wondering if there's a minimum number or a percentage of riders, because I'm with Janet. I really want to know what the riders are experiencing and what they are seeing as challenges and potential solutions or ways to overcome those challenges, because that's what I want to know too. And I just want to make sure that the riders, the users of the access ride and on-demand services are really, the ones participating in the focus groups. When we see those reports back, I want to see what they're saying on that. And I agree kind of why have a policy if we're not going to enforce it, but immediately I'm thinking I really don't want to suspend service to someone who needs this service. So I like what you were saying about some other cities, and they're kind of in between in terms of that person would call in and affirm and confirm they needed that ride that day, or otherwise it rolls off the schedule. Finding that middle ground, I think, will be advantageous to the agency and to the riders. So thank you for that.
Agreed.
When we first talked to the riders, we had a series of public meetings. We got about 100 surveys back. One of the biggest issues was no-shows and missed trips. They were getting no-showed when they shouldn't have. They were tired of going out to places that were no-showed. So they had a lot of issues there, and we're going to be addressing that head-on with some of the changes Dan talked about, and most importantly, increasing, over doubling the dispatcher corps, and that's going to solve a lot of those problems right there. And then some of the other issues that the riders had was that on-demand service, and I think those were two of the very biggest issues, having a real on-demand and having more choice, more options, and having an app for their reservations, and doing something about We Go Central was the other big one. So.
Yeah, I mean, I could see benefit to that, and if I may, I'm so sorry. Have you discussed with Tennessee Disability Coalition, or getting people for the public comment that would be utilizing the service more than, people who would be using the fixed service more? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
All right.
I'm sorry, Mary, no, please. Yeah.
So I just want a little bit, thank you for your presentation, first of all, absolutely. So are we now looking for feedback specifically at downtown library and somewhere in East Nashville? Are those the only points where we're getting input about the program?
Well, the plan is those would be hybrid meetings where we could get people online, and what we find in this.
And get them online. Yeah, that, I didn't hear
That's
that.
correct.
Yeah, my apologies, yes, there'll be hybrid meetings, and we
Thank
get good turnout at those.
Yes, sir. Yes, thank you, because it occurred to me, if you're using Access Right, it might not be easy to get to the downtown library. And I'm sorry, I know East Nashville thinks they're all that, but what about North Nashville, and what about South Nashville? I'm really more concerned, in fact, about North Nashville and South Nashville and the immigrants and, and the other populations. And so having said that, we have heard before in these meetings about the calling in, and will we start from that very point of, perhaps we may need more customer service training. I don't know, right? But are we going to start at that beginning point too, when you first call in? And again, that's to me where, operationally the process begins. But my good learned friend here may disagree. I will give it to Walter at this point.
Divide the lawyers, yay. Great idea.
I want to revisit the issue of no-shows and the problems attendant to that. There's also, you can't look at that problem in isolation from how people are scheduled, how routes are formed, how you send somebody to Madison and Hermitage at the same, Madison and Bellevue at the same hour, picking up or dropping off persons, and that happens. And it happens all too often, all too frequently. And so you have people who may have been at their scheduled point, but there's a delay in their pickup, so they're confused, and they wind up not being at that place where the bus actually arrives. It's a very complex problem, so when we start talking about penalizing riders for not being at their appointed place, we really have to look at that one within the context of all of the moving parts that you're trying to put together.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do. The no-show rate is real high, and a lot of it has to do with dispatching, not having enough dispatchers. Drivers can't get through on the radio, customers can't get through, no-shows happen, less than fully trained drivers who may not know exactly where to go, those sorts of things. And a number of other issues related to that are all part of the mix, and that's the root of what we're trying to get at when we get to the inside baseball stuff.
One more,
that we're
one more,
talking about.
one more thing,
Sure.
too. Let's look at what the cost would be for operators to have telephones or some way to communicate with the rider when that happens. And many of the drivers voluntarily do it,
Yeah, yeah.
but they're not compelled to do it. It's not mandatory that they do it. But it seems to have its own reward.
I would, in a big system like this, I would try and run those requests through the dispatcher, having more dispatchers to be able to do that work. And let me say one more thing about the punishment phase. I'm against suspending rider. I'm not personally. Professionally, I do what I'm asked to do, but personally, I think that the way Dan mentioned, that people that are through the progressive discipline are excessive no-shows, make them call a couple hours before the trip. And if they don't, well, it's on them at that point. But what we find is once you apply the pressure and once you start enforcing the no-show policy, most of the problem goes away. And you get down to the 3-4% that you should be at. Right now, you're up around 11, 12, 13%.
Good, super
So
interesting.
typically just setting an example or two of one or two no-show people that, and making them call in, the word gets out very quickly, and people stop no-showing. The dispatchers now can start to control the operation. So that's absolutely essential for success.
Jessica,
Thank you. Madam Vice Chair?
I don't know, whatever.
Chair for the day?
Call me any
Madam
chair
Chair
of
for
the day. That's me.
Chair for a day.
It seems like quite a few issues are double, if not triple-sided. So I feel like once we get more information, maybe if we make policy changes, that can help. But one of the things that concerns me also is the on-demand service is not on demand. So there's like a couple of big hurdles that you have found during your research. So great for that, but I think that makes a lot of work for us, right? An opportunity for us to get it much better on the operational side and customer care and policy side, and hopefully that will translate into a better customer environment. Thank you for that.
Yes, of course. Any other comments? All right, you're doing great work. Keep doing it. And then come back and let us know what the customers are saying. Customer
Soon,
first.
Real soon.
Okay, we're with you. Thank you again. Excellent report. Okay, that was super interesting. So next up, we have Hannah Schaefer, who is our Transit Business Intelligence Analyst, who's going to talk to us about the WeGo Link program status update.
Yes,
Welcome.
hello. Thank you. It's good to see you all again.
Yes.
So yes, as you mentioned, today I am here to give an update on the current status of our WeGo Link program. So kind of staying within the same realm of what we've been discussing. So just a quick review of how we got here. One of the major challenges to using transit as addressed in the In Motion strategic plan is the logistics of getting to and from a fixed bus stop. This could be due to lack of infrastructure such as sidewalks or customers' physical limitations. So because our service area is incredibly diverse when it comes to these factors, and not to mention the over 500 square miles of our service area, it's a lot of population to consider, and providing a service that fits the needs of most is very challenging. So to do it within a fixed route service model. So to remediate this issue, or this barrier to entry to the WeGo fixed route system, WeGo Link was piloted in fall of 2021 in a zone down in the Antioch area. And this was prioritized based on several transit propensity measures such as household income, access to vehicles, and minority status. So the success of the Antioch pilot resulted in the expansion to 3 additional zones last fall. So those were in the South Nashville area, so just adjacent to the Antioch zone, Goodlettsville, and Hermitage. And then earlier this month, we expanded the program to 3 additional zones in Bellevue, Sylvan Park, and Cockrell Bend. And so I just kind of wanted to go over what we've seen so far, especially since the expansion back in the fall. So in the first year of the Antioch pilot, we saw, modest, entry into the program with about 400 trips, averaging about $2.20 for the average passenger fare, and a total fare of about $8.50. The majority of these trips have been taken within the Nashville Village area, and really kind of diverse as far as where those trips are coming from.
Walter's out there golfing. He's skewing it with his golf matches, yeah.
The average distance of trips is about 2 miles per trip, with just about right at 10 minutes for a trip. So really showing the expansion of, who we've been able to reach with this program in this first Antioch pilot. I also wanted to show just kind of a comparison. What you're seeing on this map here is a heat map of the ridership of the previous Route 38, which, if you remember, started in downtown and then circled in this area, and you can see with those ridership patterns and how they are very similar to what we're seeing with the WeGo Link program. But at the same time, we're also seeing other trips that are being captured with this program that were not provided with Route 38. So although it's similar patterns, we're providing more options for more riders. So,
By the way, I'm going to jump in on Hannah there because Ed doesn't have the microphone. And the difference was, if you saw Hannah's numbers on the average subsidy per trip under this program, the average subsidy per trip on the 38 was about $45 per trip. So, if you kind of just measure it on that metric, it certainly is meeting one of the targets we had up front.
That's great.
yeah. Thank you, Steve, for that. That was great. So,
Ed and I are the numbers guys. Hey.
yeah. So going to some other zones, since we've expanded, this is the Goodlettsville zone, and what's unique about this one is that it's in a little bit of a transit desert is what we call, so really no access to fixed route transit if you're living within this zone. And it's become the second most used with over 50 trips per month. It does have the longest distance with the highest subsidy per trip, but what we're seeing in the benefits here is that it's giving access to customers to 2 major corridors, so Dickerson Pike and the Route 56 Gallatin Pike. So we're seeing kind of similar patterns here with, about equal distribution of where riders are going to. So in order to translate this into a fixed route, it could be very costly if you're trying to, capture trips to serve customers going to both of these corridors. So again, this program is definitely providing a service that would otherwise not be viable for residents who live in this area. Moving on to South Nashville, this area where we've seen a lot of not a lot of consistency with the number of trips per month in this area, but we are seeing some consistency in the patterns as far as, trips taken to the Welshwood, the Nolensville Walmart at Welshwood. This zone does connect riders to both Route 52 Nolensville Pike as well as the 55, but we're seeing most of those trips being taken on the Nolensville corridor, which is not necessarily a big surprise, but just something that we're kind of looking at to see how those ridership patterns kind of shift. So moving on to the last zone of the expansion from fall is the Hermitage zone. About 80 trips total. We're not seeing a lot of activity here, but we are seeing that number start to increase month over month. And this connects riders to both the Donaldson and Hermitage stations with similar activities at both. So again, kind of all over the board here is as far as where folks are coming from to connect to the service. So since with the improvement of the expansion of the zones. One thing I did not mention before, actually, I wanted to say, is that we've seen over 1,400 trips being taken just since fall of last year. So where we had about 400 trips just within the first full year of the Antioch, after that expansion, we've almost tripled the number of trips. So we're really starting to gain some traction on the program. And so that brings me to the 3 zones that were initiated earlier this month. We don't currently have any data for this just yet, but we're excited to see how those trips come in and to see how people are using the service within those areas. So again, the Bellevue zone includes Lawson High School. And then the Crocker Bend area has a lot of employment opportunities up there. And then, of course, the Sylvan Park zone as well, that was initiated earlier this month. So when it comes to what's next, obviously continued monitoring. We do love our data, so we're going to continue to keep looking at it on a month-by-month basis. And one of the crucial parts that's missing from the data that we are receiving from Uber is the outreach and engagement and the qualitative measures that we can get from customers. So really wanting to see what the customer satisfaction measures are. So doing some surveys with existing riders to see how the program is working for them, and getting input on other areas of the county that would be beneficial to expand even further. So. On the note of the continued monitoring, I just wanted to make mention of a public dashboard that we have available that does have additional metrics for each zone that I'm happy to share out with the board if you'd like to see them. We're drilling down into average trip distance, the duration, fares, and all that on a month-by-month and zone-by-zone basis. So I'm happy to share that with anybody who'd like to see that. So.
We do.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share it.
So this is one of these programs that I've always thought, well, this is great, because if these people have to walk them 2 miles to the bus stop, it's also one of those, this, Steve, I'm just like beating a drum. I don't have a measure for what success is. I don't know, is 400 good or bad? Is 50 good or bad? So I really am interested in what we think is a successful, like, when are we going to claim victory that this thing is a raging success? And I really am interested in the customer feedback. I would hope it would be very positive, right? Because before there was no choice. But yeah, I love how you put the qualitative measures and the passenger satisfaction, because I don't know where the bar is, so.
Jen, the couple comments I would make, first of all, I think, as usual, Hannah did a great job with the presentation, the information, and they're
Well done, Hannah.
crunching numbers all over the place over there. But I think a lot of folks had the impression when we kicked this off, oh, this is going to be a dominant service. Everybody's going to use it. Well, even in some of the most mature cities that have been doing this, places like Dallas, Clearwater, Florida, that's been doing it now going on almost since Uber and Lyft kind of started up. They're not even at 1% of their total ridership. So this really is a niche to meet a need, and I think that the graphics, the heat maps that Hannah showed with the old 38 is a terrific example. For what we were spending to operate the 38, we would be spending more running the 38 than we're spending on all of the zones, with more growth.
Right.
So from that standpoint, and the thing I would tell you about the 38, so you got on the wrong time. We're talking about access travel time standards. You base it on the 38, you had some 3-hour rides on that thing. I mean, you were basically meandering all over Antioch before you got anywhere.
those neighborhoods,
Where this is more of a point-to-point, and the overall goal is usually to try to connect it to a route like the 52 or the 55 that runs very frequently. In the case of the Hermitage Zone, you're either connecting to the Star or you're connecting to the 6, which isn't as consistent a service, but those ride times for folks. So if you were to extrapolate that, well, the heat map she showed for the Antioch zone, where a lot of former 38 riders, I would be willing to bet they're riding a lot shorter period of time, than they would have on the 38.
They were meandering through the neighborhood, yes. Questions, comments?
Sure. I really appreciate the presentation, Hannah. This is great. I love seeing these numbers. To your point, Janet, we may not know what raging success means
Raging
yet.
success. We want raging
But
success.
I think the cost savings that Steve mentioned is incredible. $45 per rider versus
Because
$8.50
basically,
per
you're
rider is
running, you're
incredible.
running a bus out through there that's empty 90-some% of the time.
And I would love to know the qualitative data about
Yeah.
the users, how much more what they think about it. So I appreciate it. I love that we're doing this.
I do think one of the metrics we'll see is continued growth. Now, Antioch has been running the longest, so now we're seeing the highest ridership and rates of growth. A lot of the best marketing is word of mouth. I suspect we'll see the same in South Nashville. You know, I suspect in some of the other newer zones, Bellevue that we just started, you know, that will start to pick up. And then the goal is to add more. And again, some of the prerequisites for it, you know, we like to be able to feed into a pretty robust, that's why having our really strong frequent transit network is so important. So this isn't, you're getting that connection and then you're standing at the stop for 45 minutes waiting for a bus. You know, hopefully you're just waiting 4 or 5 minutes for that vehicle. And then the other is safe places to, you know, adequate places to transfer. And that's one of the reasons our strategy of building out the transit center network, you know, is really important. You know, it's the nice thing about the Hermitage Zone is 2 rail stations are, you know, pretty ideal for that sort of thing. So we'll look forward to having, you know, Hickory Hollow Transit Center. And obviously, when we open up North Nashville, we'll look at Bordeaux zones and that kind of thing to feed into there as well.
Great. Any other last comments or questions? All right. Oh, yes.
Question for Steve. So are we going to be tracking like which drivers are doing the link portion, for example, with what it said about we're not knowing about, you know, drug and alcohol testing on them?
Well, this is, you have the availability of alternate providers if you can't use, these are almost, I think, have we had any non-Uber trips?
We have not had any.
Yeah, these are
any
all
data
Uber
points coming
trips.
in.
So we don't have any, we would not have access to any information on drivers or any of that. It's anonymized data. Now, we do have alternate providers if someone needs, you know, wheelchair accessibility or needs to pay with cash or, you know, can't use Uber. We have alternate providers that, you know, we arrange that service with. But by and large, the folks who are using it so far are all using Uber.
Okay, so the lawyer in me says they can take that up directly with Uber. And that
Pretty
kind of
much.
keeps us out of the, thank you.
Thank you,
I'll let the
lawyer.
lawyer-
I
Thank you,
can't
lawyer.
turn it off. I can't turn, I know we have a lawyer
Margaret
and
was
she's
heavily
really good.
involved in the,
Yeah.
heavily involved in the formulation and review of the agreement. with
Right,
Uber.
that was addressed.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, Hannah, you did awesome. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, now that concludes the New Initiatives and Community Engagement Committee portion of the program, and I will hand it over to Steve for the CEO's report.
Thank you, the Madam Temporary Chair.
Madam, no, Chairman for the
Chairman-
day.
Chairman of the day.
Chairman of the day.
Just a few items to report. First of all, I was honored to attend this morning's 60th State of Metro. Hard to believe, 60 years of Metro. We got nice hats celebrating the 60th anniversary. Jessica, I know you were there, as were several other folks. And I thought it was a really nice speech that Mayor Cooper gave. Touched on literally dozens of areas, but that included some things that we've been working on being featured prominently in his comments, including the completion of 76 new sheltered bus stops during the course of his administration. Certainly, we've gotten great support from the city and the capital spending plan to build out our stop improvements. Touching on the opening next spring of the Ernest R. Patton Jr. North Nashville Transit Center, as well as touching on, you know, the overall mobility improvements that will afford folks in that neighborhood. And then also talking about the long-term potential of, you know, a major transit investment with the East Bank Corridor and potential BRT and our East Bank hub. So overall, I thought it was he had a lot of ground to cover. He did cover it. And I thought transit was mentioned very prominently. Speaking of that, since I guess this will be his last State of Metro address, with the filing deadline rapidly approaching for mayoral and council candidates, Vince and Eric Beyer and I are working on our typical candidate briefing. Whenever we, you know, are going through council elections, we kind of do an open house for really any candidates to come in. We give them an overview of the system, an opportunity for Q&A, so we're putting that together. and it'll likely be in early June. So we will keep you posted on that. And they've historically been very well attended. We get a lot of good discussion, a lot of good questions.
You're going to have to get a big room. Quite a few candidates,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, we may have to have, we may have to put in a similar time limitation on the question.
Yeah, no kidding.
As I've been saying to folks, I refer to him as he who shall not be named, but today I will name him. With Trey Walker's recent departure, we're actively recruiting for a new Chief Development Officer. And I'd encourage you to get the word out to anybody who you think might be interested in that position. You know, it's going to be, Trey has very tough shoes to fill, but we only expect that whoever we bring in brings their own shoes. And they will, yes, and their shoes will grow over time.
That's right.
The other thing I'll say, since quite a few of them are in the room, so I've had the opportunity to sit down with Trey's group, and we're meeting periodically. And you guys are a pretty intense, super competent, super confident group. So I have every confidence that all the initiatives that fell under the development division are going to continue to move forward very well. This past month, we had the opportunity to host what's called the annual Think Transit Conference. It's a national conference of transit professionals. We held it here in Nashville. Over 500 folks. I think probably about half of those might have been our folks, but no, that's a bit of an exaggeration. But I saw a lot of purple shirts there. But transit professionals really from all over the country. It specifically has largely a technology focus, but also branches into, you know, other aspects of transit and mobility policy. None of you will be surprised that the conference got off to a very rousing start thanks to some very inspirational words by our chair, Gail Carr-Williams, who gave the welcoming greeting, and I think gave people a very solid message to take into all of the training and the seminars. And then we also asked, and he was gracious enough to accept, Burke Nihill, the CEO for the Tennessee Titans, gave a keynote address. I thought did a great job of not only explaining the Titans' corporate philosophy, but their vision of how transit should play a much more prominent role in the game day or the visitor experience, you know, with their guests. So, though well received, everybody loves coming to Nashville, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're back in a few years. Metro Planning is moving well along. They're working on the Global Mall revisioning study. As you'll recall, Metro Nashville purchased the property that the former mall sits on. And Metro Planning's been doing extensive community engagement, a lot of really solid planning work on how that site might evolve. We've seen some early iterations. They're going into another round of public engagement now. And as we had hoped, the Hickory Hollow Transit Center will play a prominent role as that development unfolds. So we'll be working with planning closely for that to be, which I hope it really better since we've been lining up a whole lot of funding for it already. So that would be embarrassing if we don't actually move forward with that project. Tomorrow, this isn't specifically our project, but we certainly were collaborators in it. I'll get to join with Director Alarcon from NDOT and a lot of other city officials as they celebrate the opening of the 12th Avenue Corridor Project, big bicycle pedestrian thoroughfare. But it also included improvements to 14 bus stops in the corridor, including the integration. A lot of the techniques we've had in our transit design guidelines that we started when we did the Nolensville Pike project, things like boarding islands and raised cycle tracks and that sort of thing. And I think I saw her, yes, Lydia Benda is in the back of the room. Lydia Benda will be, you know, if Gabe Burgess is the mayor of Riverfront Station, then Lydia Benda is the mayor of bus shelters all over the city. So, you know, I had the chance to ride on the 17 the other day, and I'm like, wow, this actually looks like somebody thought about transit. So I think it really is turning out nice. Speaking of NDOT, they're continuing to advance the Connect Downtown mobility planning process. They're in the process of publishing a wide variety of scenarios, and it's certainly looking at a lot more than transit, but two of the specific areas of focus are potential transit priority corridors through the downtown core, as well as how we integrate the multiple hub concept of downtown with an East Bank hub, the Elizabeth Duff Transit Center at Wego Central, and the Sobro hub down the line. So stay tuned for that. I think I spoke to Felix about it yesterday. In all likelihood, in May, we'll have an update from Marty Sewell and the NDOT team for the board on the status of that project. And then just a few RTA items. RTA's been a little busy lately. First of all, Hatch Consulting has been continuing their work on our STAR Future Vision study, looking at various scenarios of how we might better leverage that asset. Since it was predominantly an office commuter type of an operation, obviously we've taken a severe hit in ridership that hasn't really come close to recovering. So we're looking at a series of options of how we might leverage that better. We're also continuing to work on our negotiations for joint development at Donaldson Station with HG Hill and Southeast Ventures. So we're working through the appraisal process, some design iterations on intersection improvements. HG Hill and Southeast are looking at other adjoining land parcels that could be integrated into the project, so that one continues to move forward. We've been working with the city of Murfreesboro, and we think we've identified a site and have initiated land acquisition activities for a park and ride lot in Murfreesboro, really adjacent to where the city is building their new transit center and transit facility. So should be a good opportunity for, I know you know where we're talking about. And then the last thing I'll report on for RTA is we were able to complete this past month. Eric Byer, Vince, and myself traveled out to our outer counties to conduct our new member orientations for the new mayors of Rutherford County, Montgomery County, and Sumner County. So, and they all had really good questions and really good takes, and actually a pretty high level of what I'll call intelligence about where transit mobility fits into their regional plan. Don't look so surprised, Jessica. Really sharp people. So, Madam Chair of the Day.
Madam Chair of the Day, thank you
concludes my
for that
report.
acknowledgement. So, great. Thanks for everybody for your patience with me today. We do have one closing piece of news in our chair's report, and it is a happy piece of news, but a sad piece of news, and that is that our beloved Mary Griffin will be departing the WeGo Board of Directors after this meeting. And Mary's been on the board about 2.5 years. I think she's one of our absolute favorites after me, of course. And she has just shown this extraordinary amount of leadership, particularly around the Elizabeth Duff Transit Center. That was something Mary was so passionate about and put so much energy around that. She was always game for showing up at events. She was at bus rodeos and all kinds of events. She just loved doing that kind of work. She would chair the NICE committee whenever I'm out on the road somewhere. And she was really interested in equity in ridership, which is something I think that we all care a lot about, but Mary really carried that flag. She is a longtime rider. We've established that she is an attorney, and that has been an immense benefit to this board. And she's also just been a lot of fun. You know, when you get a new board member, you don't quite know how this whole thing is going to go. And she has just been an absolute joy and so much fun to have around. But she is going to be moving to a position, and we'll let her share kind of a little bit more. But we are so sad to see you go, and we are so grateful for your service. You have just been an extraordinary board member. Yeah. Would you like to say a few parting words, Mary?
Well,
Just before she does.
Yes.
no.
Roasting time, here we go.
Just before she does. Consistent with what Boy Scouts do, we're going to say atta girl, right? Atta girl.
Atta girl.
All right.
Thank you. You know, it's been my great pleasure to serve on this board with Nashville Icons. You know, I was petrified joining this board because I have great admiration for every single person at this table that sort of looks like we're at prom. I just want to say, I will bring my traditional sense of humor, that, you know, but I really was. I looked them all up and went, oh God, you know, I mean, what could I bring? You know, you already have everybody that you need, and then Jessica came, and that wasn't helpful. Because she, you know, she also knows transit better than I know transit, right? So I know that you all will be in good hands, and I feel like I learned more than I brought. You know, you have an approachable leader in Steve. I'm not sure you fully appreciate what that is. I don't think many people have that. I know it's always easy for us to take, you know, shots at the program or what could we do better, and you guys are like so all over process improvement, which I heart. Totally heart. I'm all about process improvement. Put it on my resume. Thanks, guys. You kind of helped me go. No, I wasn't looking, but the things that I've learned from you all literally changed me in a way that I'm being offered to pursue my dream. You all helped me get there. So that's pretty amazing. We aren't allowed to curse. Sometimes I do. You know, you all choose people over politics. Also fairly rare right now. Fairly rare. And for that I mean you. You, together. Choose teamwork. You choose people over politics, and you still celebrate the worker. And it struck me that one of the things one of my coworkers who's, you know, also upset that I'm leaving, I'm upset that I'm having to leave something to do something, right? I want my cake and eat it too, so I brought you cake. But it's extraordinary that you all celebrate it so much that one of the things said to me repeatedly by people where I currently work is, you were the voice of the common worker, you know? But, you know, you all helped me with that. Who knew there was a bus rodeo? If I'm not invited, I know where you all are. I will be invited. I love those hamburgers. These folks, they have it going on, you know?
I think we're going to have to put your husband to work in the body shop. He really enjoyed that.
My husband was in love, with the whole, the mechanic. And of course, Carl, where are you, Carl? Well, there's two Carls. Yeah, there's two. My Carls. Both of my Carls.
Oh.
You know, my Carls. You know, you guys, I'm not going to leave. I'll just show up one day, you know, or you can call me.
We have an apprentice program. We could sign you up on the side if you'd like to do that.
Oh, Steve has something
Maybe
to say
on the
about that.
mechanical, yeah, we might put you to work on the mechanical, but there's no way you're going behind the wheel of a bus. I've seen
Well,
that,
I was
so.
going to say, I'm going to go into your apprenticeship program to drive, but I know Steve won't let me in because I'm not an awesome driver. I'll tell you guys when I'm going to work. But I want to leave you with this. You all are inspirational innovators. That's what you all are, you know? And I'm not going to be gone. You'll find out soon enough. Just look me up on LinkedIn. By Monday, I can say where I am. And you will very much continue to be involved in my life, okay? Thank you all for everything that you've done.
Yay, Mary. Okay, and thank you for the cupcakes. I'm going to go get one right now. So is there anything else? Okay. If not, then we are adjourned. Oh, can I?
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.